Quality of life. It's a phrase and a police approach that gets a lot of attention in New York City. It was the police the small things approach, better known as broken windows, that led to maybe the city's sharp reduction in crime. But others say broken windows, it only led to too many New Yorkers behind bars or just stuck in the court system. Our next, the impact of broken windows policing on individuals as well as the broader community by looking at the overall system itself. Issa Kohler-Hausmann, she's an associate professor of law and sociology at Yale University. Her book, called Misdemeanor Land, Criminal Courts and Social Control in an Age of Broken Windows Policing. Issa, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, first of all, I think people have a broad idea, but crime rate really peaked in the late 80s, and then lawmakers, and probably most notably then Mayor Giuliani, came in, and then we got the broken windows approach. Talk about what the intent was with the new policing strategy, and then also the consequences.
Right, as you mentioned, broken windows policing was really launched a couple of years after both property and violent crime peaked in New York. It was still a very serious issue, and of course crime is always a serious issue, especially for the communities that are most affected by it.
Around what year are we talking about?
1990, 1991, okay, depending how you measure it,
yeah,
was probably the peak years for both violent and property crime, and broken windows policing, as you mentioned, really was officially launched 94 when Giuliani took over as mayor and appointed Bill Bratton in the first reign as the head of New York City Police.
Give an idea to folks, what was the reception when they laid out what they were going to do? Everybody remembered the squeegee guys. That was one of the things that people talked about, the graffiti on the subways, the trash, and also fare beaters and all the rest. When it was launched, what kind of a reception did it get more broadly? Oh, it's about time, or wait a minute?
I think that when it was launched, no one really quite knew what to make of the overall strategy. Of course, quality of life issues and serious crime are major concerns and very real concerns for many people. At the time that it was launched, this really was a law enforcement experiment. No one knew what the effect would be of making huge numbers of misdemeanor arrests, issuing summonses, which are those little pink tickets that many New Yorkers know quite well that you get for violations or infractions.
Yep.
And then later, about 7 to 8 years later, really ramping up stop, question, and frisk, which of course we know well.
Absolutely. And I think the perception I had before I saw your book, and I think readers as well, is, well, the consequence of that is convictions must have gone through the roof. But you said, no. What happened instead was something called Misdemeanor Land. Explain what that term is and really what the net results were.
So after someone's arrested for a misdemeanor, they have to go somewhere. And as you mentioned, the law enforcement experiment got a lot of attention. People thought a lot about it. But it seems to be that both at the time of innovating this and afterwards, people didn't seem to really think what was going to happen to the hundreds of thousands of people. It's important to remember that since the launch of broken windows policing, according to almost every data point that I can get, we've made about, or New York City Police Department has made about 4.5 million misdemeanor arrests in the city of New York.
And overwhelmingly brown and black people.
Over 80%. By far, like mass incarceration, this mass misdemeanor policy is a policy that disproportionately affects young men of color and primarily black and Hispanic neighborhoods. And so that no one seemed to really think what was going to happen when you flooded the lower courts with a huge number of cases without really a similar increase in the resources. So what you ended up seeing over this period of time, perhaps not surprisingly, is that the conviction rate actually went down, and it went down substantially, and that is surprising.
When you say it went down, to me the number was stunning as to what the actual rate of conviction was for this. We're talking single digit, right?
So in recent years, the percent of annual misdemeanor cases that result in a misdemeanor conviction is probably 17%, and the percent that result in a jail time and a prospective jail sentence, so jail time after the conviction as opposed to a time served sentence, which is the time that you spend in custody before seeing the judge, usually at arraignment, less than 10%, maybe 7%.
Wow. So while many people weren't going to be spending time behind bars, other than, as you mentioned, time served, except in rare circumstances, there were other consequences. Let's go through some of the terms of the book, one of which you say is marking. Explain what that is.
So marking is basically just the public records created by having the case open. Any legal case creates records. You have to docket it. It's on the person's rap sheet, at least during the time that it's open. And in New York State, one of the most common dispositions is called an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, and that just means the case is technically adjourned for a period of time, after which it should be dismissed and sealed.
So even if you're not convicted, and even if you're not certainly put in jail for it, you're marked. There's the hassle that goes along with it, and then basically you're going to be measured going forward, not if you walk into the court for the first time, whatever the next misdemeanor even could be, but now you're in the system, right? And that's where you're going to be measured against.
Exactly, and I think the best way to think about this might be in terms of cumulative disadvantage. So you think that even if you have a system that on the first contact doesn't automatically convict people and send them to jail, people in the most policed communities, which tend to be the highest crime communities, so they're already sort of the people that are suffering under the consequences of having to deal with crime and poverty in their communities, are the people that are the most likely to be arrested for cited for low-level offenses. So let's take the #1 arrest category in New York for all the broken windows periods, marijuana possession. All public health data shows that marijuana use is equal by race, ethnic group, if not actually a little higher in white communities. And by far the #1 arrest category, like I said, was marijuana, and that was almost exclusively people of color during those years. So even if they might not have gotten a conviction from that first marijuana arrest, if you're living in a community where you're more likely to be arrested again, or maybe you have 2 jobs and it's hard for you to make a court appearance, so you weren't on one of them, that's going to end up transitioning to a conviction over time.
We've talked a lot on the air about broken windows and stop and frisk, and many people thought that, you know, once that changed under the new administration, that was a thing of the past. But as you learn, there's a whole other world out there called Misdemeanor Land that Issa breaks into. I appreciate the time here, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Up next, we just heard the warnings and the worries about the impact of the police policies like broken windows have had on the population that gets caught in the system. But with the city now ending arrests for low-level crimes like fare jumping or smoking a joint in public, is that a victory for the rights of New Yorkers, or is it the beginning of another slide into a time when the city wasn't so safe?